Read The Power of a Woman Living Alone Without Boyfriends, heng Motivation. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome. Before we begin, I want you to close your eyes for just a moment. Picture this: a woman walks into a room. She carries herself with quiet confidence. Her eyes are clear, focused, purposeful. She doesn't glance around seeking approval or validation. She doesn't check her phone hoping for a text that will make her feel worthy. She simply exists, fully and completely in her own power. This woman has discovered something that our society desperately tries to hide from her, that she is already whole, already complete, already everything she needs to be. Open your eyes. Today, we're going to talk about that woman, and perhaps you'll discover that woman is you. My friends, we live in a world that has convinced women that their worth is measured by their relationship status. From the moment a little girl can understand language, she's fed fairy tales about princes who will rescue her, complete her, make her life meaningful. She's told that her greatest achievement will be walking down an aisle in a white dress, that her success is measured not by her own accomplishments, but by her ability to attract and keep a man. But what if I told you that this is one of the greatest lies ever sold to humanity? What if the real power, the real strength, the real magic lies in a woman's ability to stand alone, to thrive alone, to create a life so rich and meaningful that she doesn't need anyone else to validate her existence? I want to share with you today the profound wisdom I've discovered through years of observation, meditation, and understanding the true nature of human potential. The power of a woman living alone, without boyfriends, is not about rejecting love or relationships. It's about discovering that you are already love itself. Let me tell you about Sarah. Sarah is 32 years old. For the first 28 years of her life, she lived exactly as society told her to live. She jumped from relationship to relationship, each time believing that this would be the one to complete her. She planned her weekends around dates. She chose her clothes based on what men might find attractive. She made career decisions based on what would be impressive to potential partners. Her entire identity was built around being desirable to others. Then something happened. Her last relationship ended, and instead of immediately seeking another one, something inside her whispered, "Stop. Just stop and be still for a moment." For the first time in her adult life, Sarah found herself truly alone. And in that solitude, she made a discovery that changed everything. She realized she didn't know who she was when she wasn't trying to be what someone else wanted her to be. She had spent so much energy molding herself to fit into relationships that she had lost touch with her authentic self. The woman in the mirror was a stranger, a collection of compromises and adaptations rather than a genuine human being. But here's where the magic began. In her solitude, Sarah started to remember things she had forgotten. She remembered that she loved to paint, but had stopped because her ex-boyfriend thought it was a waste of time. She remembered that she loved to travel solo, but had always felt pressured to find someone to go with her. She remembered that she had dreams of starting her own business, but had put them on hold to support her partner's ambitions. One by one, Sarah began to reclaim these pieces of herself. She set up an easel in her living room and painted until sunrise. She booked a solo trip to Italy and spent 2 weeks falling in love with art, food, and her own company. She quit her corporate job and started the sustainable fashion company she had dreamed about for years. But the most profound change wasn't in what she did. It was in who she became. Sarah discovered what I call sovereign completeness. This is the recognition that you are not half a person waiting for someone else to complete you. You are a whole universe, complex and magnificent in your own right. When Sarah walked into rooms now, people noticed something different about her. She had what I call the glow of self-possession. This isn't arrogance or coldness. It's the quiet confidence that comes from knowing exactly who you are and being completely comfortable with that knowledge. Let me ask you something. And I want you to really think about this. When was the last time you made a decision based purely on what you wanted, not on what would make you more attractive to others or what would help you find or keep a relationship? The truth is, most women have never experienced this. They've been so conditioned to consider others first, to make themselves appealing, to be accommodating and agreeable, that they've forgotten what their own authentic desires even feel like. This is what I call the great forgetting. Society has convinced women to forget their own power in exchange for the promise of being chosen by someone else. But here's what they don't tell you. When you give away your power to be chosen, you lose the ability to truly choose for yourself. I once knew a woman named Maria who embodied this principle beautifully. Maria was a successful architect who had been single for 3 years. Her friends constantly pressured her to get back out there and find someone. They set up blind dates, created dating profiles for her, and constantly asked her if she was lonely. But Maria had discovered something profound. She had learned to distinguish between loneliness and solitude. Loneliness is the painful feeling that something is missing from your life. Solitude is the powerful recognition that you have everything you need within yourself. Maria would wake up on Saturday mornings and ask herself a simple question: what would bring me joy today? Sometimes the answer was hiking alone in the mountains, feeling connected to nature and her own thoughts. Sometimes it was spending hours in her workshop, designing and building furniture with her own hands. Sometimes it was cooking an elaborate meal just for herself, savoring every bite without having to consider anyone else's preferences. Her friends worried about her. They said things like, "Don't you want to share these experiences with someone?" But Maria had realized something they hadn't. She was sharing these experiences with someone too, herself. And she had become someone worth sharing with. This is a crucial point that I want you to understand deeply. When you live alone without constantly seeking a romantic partner, you're forced to develop a relationship with yourself. And like any relationship, this one requires attention, care, and cultivation. Think about how much energy most women put into understanding their romantic partners. They learn their likes and dislikes, their moods and triggers, their dreams and fears. They become experts in making their partners happy. But how much of that same attention do they give to understanding themselves? When you live in solitude, you have no choice but to become intimate with your own nature. You learn what genuinely makes you happy versus what you think should make you happy. You discover your natural rhythms, when you're most creative, when you need rest, when you feel most energized. You begin to trust your own judgment because you're not constantly seeking validation from others. I want to share with you the story of a woman I'll call Grace. Grace was 45 when she decided to embrace living alone. She had been married for 15 years, and after her divorce, everyone expected her to quickly find another partner. "You're too young to be alone," they said. "You'll regret wasting your good years," they warned. But Grace had a different intuition. She felt called to discover who she was outside of the role of wife, outside of the need to be pleasing to a man. So she made a radical decision. She took what she called 5-year sabbatical from romantic love. The first year was challenging. Grace had to learn to sit with her own thoughts without distraction. She had to face the parts of herself she had been avoiding by staying busy with relationships. She discovered that she had been using romance as a way to avoid dealing with her own emotional wounds and insecurities. But as she worked through these challenges, something beautiful began to emerge. Grace started to feel what she described as an inner fullness that she had never experienced before. She realized that all her life, she had been looking outside herself for a sense of completeness that could only be found within. By the 3rd year of her solitude, Grace had transformed completely. She had started a nonprofit organization that helped single mothers develop job skills. She had learned to play the violin, something she had always wanted to do, but never had time for. She had developed deep friendships based on genuine connection rather than the superficial socializing she had done as part of a couple. But perhaps most importantly, Grace had developed what I call unshakable self-love. This isn't the shallow self-love that's popular in social media culture, the kind that depends on external validation and positive affirmations. This is the deep, abiding love that comes from truly knowing yourself and accepting what you find there. When Grace's 5-year sabbatical ended, she made another radical decision. She chose to continue living alone, not because she was avoiding love, but because she had discovered that she was already living in love, love with herself, with her life, with her purpose. This brings me to a crucial point that often gets misunderstood. Choosing to live alone without boyfriends is not about becoming bitter or closed off to love. It's about becoming so full of love for yourself and your life that you no longer need someone else to provide it for you. When you reach this state, something paradoxical happens. You become more attractive, not less, but attractive in a completely different way. You're no longer attractive because you need something from others. You're attractive because you have something valuable to offer your authentic, complete, self-possessed self. Let me tell you about a conversation I had with a woman named Jennifer. Jennifer had been living alone for 2 years when she said something that perfectly captured this principle. I used to go on dates hoping the man would like me. Now, if I ever go on a date, I'm curious whether I'll like him. The entire dynamic has shifted. This shift is profound. When you're not desperately seeking validation or completion from others, you can see them clearly for who they really are. You're not projecting your needs onto them or trying to force them to fill roles they may not be suited for. You can appreciate them as individuals rather than as potential solutions to your loneliness or incompleteness. But living alone as a woman in our society requires tremendous courage. Every day, you're bombarded with messages that suggest something is wrong with you if you're not in a relationship. Well, meaning friends and family members constantly ask when you're going to settle down, as if your current life is somehow temporary or insufficient. The media reinforces this message constantly. Movies and television shows rarely portray single women as happy and fulfilled. They're either desperately seeking love or tragically alone, waiting for someone to rescue them from their supposedly empty lives. But I want you to consider this: what if these messages exist precisely because a woman who is truly content with her own company represents a threat to a system that profits from her insecurity? Think about it. How much money do industries make from women's relationship anxiety? The beauty industry that promises to make you more attractive to potential partners. The fashion industry that sells you clothes to catch someone's eye. The self-help industry that offers to fix whatever is supposedly wrong with you, that's keeping you from finding love. When you realize you don't need fixing, that you're already complete, that you're already worthy of love, especially your own love, you stop being such an easy target for these messages and the industries behind them. I want to share with you 3 fundamental principles that every woman who chooses to live alone must understand and embrace. These are not just concepts to think about, they are ways of being that must be cultivated daily through practice and awareness. The first principle is what I call radical self-acceptance. This means accepting yourself completely as you are right now, not as you might become if you lose weight, make more money, or find the right person to love you. It means looking in the mirror and saying, this person, exactly as she is worthy of love, respect, and happiness. Radical self-acceptance doesn't mean you stop growing or improving. It means your growth comes from a place of self-love rather than self-rejection. You exercise because you love your body and want it to be strong, not because you hate how it looks. You pursue career goals because you believe in your potential, not because you're trying to prove your worth to others. I knew a woman named Diane who struggled with this concept. She would say, But if I accept myself as I am, won't I become complacent? Won't I stop trying to improve? This is a common misunderstanding. True self-acceptance actually creates the perfect conditions for growth because it removes the desperate, grasping energy that often sabotages our efforts. When Diane finally embraced radical self-acceptance, she discovered something amazing. The changes she had been struggling to make for years began happening naturally. She started eating healthier, not because she hated her body, but because she loved it and wanted to nourish it well. She began exercising regularly, not to punish herself, but because movement brought her joy. She pursued hobbies and interests with genuine enthusiasm rather than as ways to make herself more interesting to potential partners. The second principle is sovereign decision making. This means making choices based on your own values, desires, and intuition rather than on what you think will make you more attractive to others or what society expects of you. Sovereign decision making requires you to know yourself deeply. You must understand what you truly value, not what you think you should value. You must be able to distinguish between your authentic desires and the desires that have been programmed into you by family, culture, or media. Let me share the story of Rebecca, a brilliant scientist who had always been told she was too intimidating for relationships. Men would initially be attracted to her intelligence, but then feel threatened by it. For years, Rebecca tried to dim her light, to make herself smaller and less threatening. She would downplay her achievements on dates and pretend to be less knowledgeable about topics she was passionate about. When Rebecca embraced sovereign decision making, everything changed. She decided she would rather be authentically herself and attract the right person than pretend to be someone else and attract the wrong person. More importantly, she realized that she would rather be alone and authentic than coupled and fake. This decision transformed not just her dating life, but her entire existence. At work, she stopped apologizing for her expertise and began speaking up more confidently. In social situations, she engaged in conversations about topics that genuinely interested her rather than dumbing herself down. She dressed in ways that made her feel powerful rather than just attractive. The result, Rebecca's career flourished. Her friendships deepened because people were now relating to the real her. And yes, she eventually met someone who was attracted to her intelligence rather than threatened by it. But by then, she had learned something crucial. She didn't need that relationship to feel complete or worthy. The third principle is creative life force. When you're not spending your energy trying to find, attract, or maintain a romantic relationship, you have tremendous creative and life force available for other pursuits. This energy can be channeled into career goals, artistic endeavors, spiritual growth, community service, or any other area that calls to your soul. Many women underestimate how much mental and emotional energy they spend on romantic relationships or the search for them. There's the time spent getting ready for dates, the mental energy spent analyzing text messages and interactions, the emotional energy spent dealing with relationship drama or disappointment. There's the opportunity cost of making decisions based on relationship considerations rather than pure personal fulfillment. I want to tell you about Sophia, a painter who realized she had been unconsciously limiting her artistic expression to create work that was prettier and more commercially appealing, partly because she worried that creating darker or more challenging art might make her seem less feminine or approachable to potential partners. When Sophia chose to live alone and focus purely on her art, she experienced what she called creative liberation. She began creating the work that truly called to her soul, regardless of whether it was commercially viable or romantically appealing. Her art became more authentic, more powerful, more meaningful. The irony is that this authentic work was actually more successful than her previous, more commercial pieces. When you create from authentic self-expression rather than from a need to please others, Your work has a power and authenticity that resonates with people on a deeper level. But perhaps the most profound aspect of Sophia's transformation was how her relationship with creativity itself changed. She realized that creativity was not just something she did, it was something she was. When you're not giving your creative life force away to romantic drama and relationship maintenance, you can use it to literally create your life as a work of art. This brings me to a concept that is central to understanding the power of a woman living alone, the distinction between independence and interdependence. Our society often presents these as opposites, but they're actually complementary principles that can coexist beautifully. Independence means being able to take care of yourself emotionally, financially, and practically. It means not needing others to complete you or validate your worth. Interdependence means recognizing that you exist in relationship with others and that your well-being is connected to the well-being of your community and the world around you. A woman who has mastered both independence and interdependence is incredibly powerful. She doesn't need others, but she can choose to engage with them from a place of strength rather than neediness. She can offer genuine support and love because she's not depleted by her own unmet needs. She can receive help and care without feeling like she owes something in return or that accepting help diminishes her worth. I think of a woman named Carol who embodies this principle perfectly. Carol is 58 and has lived alone for over a decade. But she's far from isolated. She has created what she calls chosen family, a network of deep friendships with people who share her values and support her growth. She mentors young women in her profession. She volunteers at a local animal shelter. She's deeply connected to her community in meaningful ways. But the key difference is that all of these relationships are chosen rather than driven by need. Carol engages with others because she wants to, because it brings her joy and fulfillment, not because she's trying to fill an empty space inside herself. When you live from this place of chosen engagement, rather than desperate need, your relationships become much more authentic and satisfying. You attract people who are also operating from wholeness rather than neediness. You create connections based on mutual respect and genuine affection rather than codependency and fear of being alone. This doesn't mean that choosing to live alone is always easy. There are challenges and moments of difficulty that must be acknowledged and addressed with wisdom and compassion. One of the biggest challenges is dealing with social pressure and judgment. As a woman living alone, you will encounter people who see your choice as threatening to their own worldview. Some will pity you, assuming you must be lonely or broken. Others will judge you, suggesting you're selfish or afraid of commitment. Still others will try to fix you by setting you up with people or giving you unsolicited advice about your love life. Learning to navigate these social pressures while staying true to your choice requires developing what I call loving boundaries. This means you can acknowledge others' concerns without absorbing their anxiety or changing your path to make them more comfortable. When someone says, "Aren't you worried about growing old alone?" you can respond with something like, "I appreciate your concern, and I've actually given this a lot of thought. I'm building a rich, full life with many meaningful connections. I feel very well cared for and supported." You're not being defensive or angry, but you're also not allowing their fear to become your fear. Another challenge is learning to handle practical matters that couples might share. This includes everything from financial planning to home maintenance to having someone to call in case of emergency. But here's what I've observed. When women are forced to handle these things independently, they often become much more competent and confident than they ever imagined possible. I remember Lisa, who had never even changed a light bulb because her ex-husband always handled those things. When she started living alone, she was initially overwhelmed by all the practical responsibilities. But as she learned to handle them one by one, she discovered capabilities she never knew she had. She learned to do basic car maintenance, manage investments, and even do minor home repairs. More importantly, Lisa realized that being able to handle these practical matters herself gave her a sense of security and self-reliance that no relationship ever had. She knew that no matter what happened, she could take care of herself. This knowledge was incredibly empowering. There's also the challenge of handling emotions without a built-in support system. When you live with a partner, you have someone immediately available to process experiences with, to celebrate successes with, or to comfort you during difficult times. When you live alone, you must develop other ways of handling the full spectrum of human emotions. This actually becomes one of the greatest gifts of living alone. You're forced to develop emotional intelligence and resilience that many people never cultivate because they always have others to lean on. You learn to sit with difficult emotions without immediately seeking distraction or rescue. You learn to celebrate your own successes and to comfort yourself during hard times. A woman named Patricia described this beautifully. She said, "When I was married, I never learned how to properly comfort myself when I was upset. I would always turn to my husband for that. When I started living alone, I had to figure out what actually made me feel better. I discovered that a hot bath with candles and music worked better than any words someone else could offer me. I learned that taking a walk in nature was more healing for my anxiety than any advice. I became my own best friend." This self-friendship that Patricia describes is perhaps the most valuable relationship you can ever develop. When you truly become your own best friend, someone you enjoy spending time with, someone you trust, someone you treat with kindness and respect, your entire life transforms. But what about physical intimacy and companionship? This is often the first concern people raise when discussing the choice to live alone. Let me address this directly and honestly. Physical intimacy is a natural human need, and choosing to live alone doesn't mean choosing to live without physical touch or sexual expression. It means being intentional about how you meet these needs rather than settling for poor relationships just to have access to physical intimacy. Some women who choose to live alone decide to have occasional intimate connections with people they trust without the commitment of a romantic relationship. Others find that as they develop a deeper relationship with themselves, their need for external validation through physical intimacy actually decreases. Some discover forms of intimacy they had never explored with nature, with their creative work, with spiritual practices. As for companionship, this is where the principle of interdependence becomes crucial. Humans are social beings, and we all need connection and community. But this doesn't have to come in the form of a romantic partner. Some of the deepest, most satisfying companionship can come from friendships, chosen family, community involvement, or spiritual community. I want to share the story of Alina, who worried that living alone meant she would miss out on the companionship of sharing daily life with someone. But Alina discovered something beautiful. When you're not depending on one person to meet all your companionship needs, you can have different types of companionship with different people. She had her hiking buddy who shared her love of nature. She had her book club friends who loved discussing literature. She had her creative partner who collaborated with her on art projects. She had her spiritual friend who joined her for meditation and philosophical conversations. Each relationship was rich and meaningful in its own way, and together they provided more varied and satisfying companionship than any single romantic relationship had ever offered her. This brings me to an important point about the quality versus quantity of relationships. When you're not desperately seeking one person to complete you, you can be much more selective about the relationships you do choose to cultivate. You can prioritize depth over superficiality, authenticity over social acceptability, mutual growth over comfortable stagnation. Many women who live alone report that their friendships become much deeper and more meaningful than they were when they were focused on romantic relationships. This is partly because they have more time and energy to invest in these friendships, but also because they're relating from a place of wholeness rather than need. Now, let me address what might be the deepest fear that prevents many women from embracing the power of living alone, the fear that choosing this path means giving up on love entirely. This fear is based on a fundamental misunderstanding of what love actually is. Love is not something you find or something that happens to you. Love is something you are, something you cultivate, something you express. When you learn to love yourself fully and live in harmony with your authentic nature, you become a source of love rather than someone seeking love from external sources. This doesn't mean you can never have romantic love in your life. It means that if romantic love does come, it will be an addition to an already complete life rather than a desperate attempt to fill a void. You will attract partners who are also complete in themselves, and together you can create relationships based on mutual enhancement rather than mutual dependency. But even more importantly, when you realize that you are love itself, that your capacity to love yourself, your friends, your community, your work, your creative expressions is unlimited, you stop experiencing the scarcity mentality that makes romantic love seem like the only form of love that matters. I want to share with you the profound realization that changed everything for a woman named Victoria. Victoria had always believed that the love she felt for her friends, her family, her pets, her garden, her art was somehow less valuable than romantic love. She had been taught that these forms of love were just consolation prizes for people who couldn't find real love. But during a period of deep solitude, Victoria had what she called her love awakening. She realized that love is love, the quality of the feeling, the warmth, the care, the connection. These were the same whether directed toward a romantic partner or toward any other aspect of life. The love she felt while gardening was just as real and meaningful as any romantic love she had experienced. The love she felt for her best friend was just as deep and satisfying as any partnership. This realization liberated Victoria from the hierarchy of love that society had imposed on her. She stopped seeing her single life as something to be endured until real love came along. She started recognizing that she was already living a life full of love. She just hadn't been taught to value it properly. This brings us to what I consider the ultimate power of a woman living alone, the power to redefine love, success, and fulfillment on your own terms. When you stop accepting society's definitions of what makes a life valuable, you become free to create a life that is authentically meaningful to you. Society tells you that success means finding and keeping a man. But what if success means developing your talents to their fullest potential? What if it means creating something beautiful that didn't exist before? What if it means becoming so comfortable in your own skin that you radiate peace and confidence wherever you go? Society tells you that fulfillment comes from romantic love and family. But what if fulfillment comes from knowing yourself so deeply that you can navigate any challenge with wisdom and grace? What if it comes from using your gifts to serve something larger than yourself? What if it comes from the simple joy of being fully present in your own life? I want to tell you about a conversation I had with an elderly woman named Rose, who had lived alone for 30 years after her husband died. Rose was 85 years old, and people often asked her if she was lonely. Her response was profound. How can I be lonely when I'm in such good company? I've spent 30 years getting to know myself, and I find myself quite interesting. I've cultivated friendships with books, with music, with the garden, with my thoughts. I wake up every morning curious about what I'll discover about life that day. Loneliness is not about being alone. It's about being disconnected from yourself. Rose had discovered what I call cosmic companionship, the recognition that you are never truly alone because you are part of the vast, interconnected web of life. When you feel connected to nature, to your creative source, to the deeper patterns and rhythms of existence, you experience a profound sense of belonging that doesn't depend on any individual relationship. This sense of cosmic companionship is available to anyone who is willing to cultivate it, but it's often harder to access when you're constantly focused on human relationships. It requires periods of solitude and stillness to develop the sensitivity to feel these deeper connections. But perhaps the most radical aspect of choosing to live alone as a woman is the political dimension of this choice. In a world that has historically defined women primarily in relation to men as daughters, wives, mothers, choosing to define yourself independently is a profound act of rebellion and empowerment. When you refuse to organize your life around attracting and maintaining romantic relationships with men, you are challenging thousands of years of conditioning that has taught women to see themselves as incomplete without male partnership. You are asserting that your life has value and meaning in its own right, not because of how it relates to others. This choice has ripple effects beyond your personal life. When other women see you thriving alone, it gives them permission to consider this possibility for themselves. When young girls see successful, happy single women, it expands their understanding of what's possible for their own lives. You become part of changing the cultural narrative about what it means to be a woman in the world. I think of women throughout history who made this choice, often at great personal cost. Women like Frida Kahlo, who said, "I am my own muse, my own subject. I know myself better than anyone else. I am what I have and what I am." Or Georgia O'Keeffe, who chose to spend much of her later life alone in the desert, creating some of her most powerful art in solitude. These women understood something that our culture is only beginning to recognize, that a woman's power reaches its fullest expression when she is not trying to please or accommodate anyone else. When she is free to explore the depths of her own nature and express what she finds there. But living as a powerful woman alone also means taking responsibility for your own happiness and fulfillment in ways that many people avoid. You can't blame your dissatisfaction on a partner who doesn't understand you. You can't postpone your dreams waiting for someone else to support them. You can't avoid dealing with your personal issues by focusing on relationship drama instead. This level of responsibility can be intimidating, but it's also incredibly empowering. When you take full responsibility for your life, you also gain full power to change it. You become the author of your own story rather than a supporting character in someone else's narrative. Let me share with you a practice that has helped many women I've worked with to embrace this responsibility and power. It's what I call the daily check-in. Each morning, before you engage with the outside world, you spend a few minutes asking yourself 3 questions. First, how am I feeling right now? And what do I need to support myself today? This helps you stay connected to your authentic emotional state rather than automatically adapting to what you think others need from you. Second, what would bring me genuine joy today? This keeps you connected to your authentic desires and helps you make choices based on what truly fulfills you rather than what you think you should do. Third, how can I express my authentic self today? This reminds you that your primary job is to be yourself, not to be what others want you to be. These simple questions, asked consistently over time, help you develop the muscle of self-awareness and self-advocacy that is essential for living powerfully alone. Another crucial practice is what I call celebration rituals. When you live alone, you must become skilled at acknowledging and celebrating your own successes, both large and small. This might mean taking yourself out for a special dinner when you complete a project, buying yourself flowers to mark a personal milestone, or simply taking a moment to acknowledge your growth and progress. Many women struggle with this because they've been taught that celebrating themselves is selfish or conceited. But celebration is actually a form of gratitude. You're recognizing and appreciating the gifts and efforts that have brought good things into your life. When you celebrate yourself, You reinforce positive patterns and build the self-appreciation that is fundamental to living powerfully alone. I want to address one more concern that often comes up when discussing the choice to live alone: the question of aging and end of life care. Many people worry that if they don't have a spouse or children, they'll have no one to care for them as they age. This concern, while understandable, is based on some outdated assumptions about family structures and aging. The reality is that many elderly people in traditional family structures still experience loneliness and inadequate care, while many people who have cultivated strong, chosen families and community connections age with tremendous support and dignity. The key is being intentional about building the support systems you'll need throughout your life. This might mean maintaining strong friendships across age groups, staying involved in community organizations, considering co-housing or intentional community living situations, and making financial and legal preparations for your future needs. But perhaps most importantly, it means developing the inner resources to wisdom, acceptance, spiritual connection, creative engagement with life that allow you to age gracefully regardless of your external circumstances. I knew a woman named Margaret who died at age 92 after living alone for the last 25 years of her life. Margaret's memorial service was packed with people whose lives she had touched, former students she had mentored, neighbors she had befriended, fellow volunteers from various organizations she had served. Margaret had created what she called a legacy of love, not through romantic partnership or biological children, but through the countless ways she had contributed to her community over the decades. Her life was a testament to the fact that a woman living alone can create just as much meaning, connection, and positive impact as anyone in a traditional family structure. As we near the end of our time together today, I want to leave you with what I consider the deepest truth about the power of a woman living alone. It's not really about living alone at all. It's about learning to live in authentic relationship with yourself, and from that foundation of self-love and self-knowledge, creating a life that reflects your truest values and deepest purposes. When you master the art of being alone, you develop capacities that serve you whether you're single or partnered, whether you're surrounded by people or in solitude. You develop the ability to be present with whatever life brings. You develop the courage to be authentic, even when it's uncomfortable. You develop the wisdom to know the difference between what you can control and what you must accept. These are not just personal benefits, they're gifts you bring to every relationship and every situation in your life. A woman who has learned to live powerfully alone becomes a source of stability and wisdom for everyone around her. She doesn't need others to rescue her, so she's free to support others from a place of strength. She doesn't need validation, so she can offer authentic appreciation. She doesn't need others to complete her, so she can love them for who they truly are rather than for what they provide her. But perhaps most importantly, a woman who has embraced the power of living alone has learned something that our culture desperately needs to remember: that every individual human being is already complete, already valuable, already worthy of love and respect simply by virtue of existing. In a world that profits from insecurity and incompleteness, this recognition is revolutionary. In a culture that teaches women to diminish themselves to make others comfortable, choosing to live fully and authentically is an act of courage. In a society that measures women's worth by their relationships with men, defining yourself independently is a radical act of self-determination. So as you leave here today, I want you to remember this, whether you choose to live alone for a season, for many years, or for the rest of your life. You have within you everything you need to create a life of profound meaning, deep satisfaction, and genuine happiness. You don't need anyone else's permission to be yourself. You don't need anyone else's validation to know your worth. You don't need anyone else's presence to feel complete. The power of a woman living alone is not the power of isolation or bitterness or fear. It's the power of self-possession.